beyond the rearview mirror. We know we have to put the labels off of us that used to be from the past. But we also have to figure out how we forgive those people that have put those labels on us or that have hurt us through our past and caused us that pain and suffering. Why should we forgive them? Well, because unforgiveness, it hurts us more than it hurts them. And the truth is, we are going to constantly need forgiveness ourselves. But we also have to know how to forgive them. And really, you start with prayer. Go to God first. Let Him know where the struggle is aligning and seek His help in it, because His strength will probably be needed to accomplish the task of actually then going and forgiving others as He has forgiven us. Now, on the other side of that equation, it's not necessarily a whole lot of fun for us to have to go to somebody that we know we have wronged and ask for the forgiveness, is it? It's not always a fun thing to do. We don't like to admit that we're the offender. We don't like to admit that we're the one that's caused the hurt. But seeking forgiveness and restoration of broken relationships is just as important in our walk with Christ as offering forgiveness is. Neither is necessarily an easy thing to do. We know that. It's not easy. It can be difficult. But we have to choose obedience to God over our own self-centered perspectives. So how important is this idea of seeking out forgiveness? Well, let's look at Jesus' words in Matthew 5. He says, "So if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First to be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift." In other words, when you are preparing to come for worship, when you are preparing to come before God, and you realize and remember, you know what, I know I hurt that person, I disappointed that person, maybe I lied to that person. Ultimately, you realize you've let someone down in some way, and you've caused them pain and suffering. Jesus is telling us that before you enter into His presence for worship, which is the giving of yourself and your resources to Him, first you should go and reconcile and resolve the differences with that person that you know you've hurt. God's saying you shouldn't just come on Sunday and just go through the motions. We need to take care of business before we enter into the presence of God. When we haven't been loving, when we haven't been working toward reconciliation relationships, ultimately that's supposed to become a part of our worship of God. It needs to be and should be a part of the prioritization of that process, because we are the best reflection of Jesus when we are truly loving others the way that He does and the way that He loves us, working through the difficulty, finding healing and wholeness, and mending those broken relationships. Now, we could look at this process, or maybe rephrase this idea into a section of the Beatitudes. Maybe you're familiar with the Beatitudes, but one in particular in Matthew 5:9, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." So we can repurpose or rephrase this concept into saying we're going to be about making peace. Now, notice the important terminology that this verse is presenting, okay? Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," not the peacekeepers. There is a huge difference, okay? A peacekeeper is someone who will actually avoid confrontation in order to keep the peace. How many of you have ever played the role of a peacekeeper? Guilty. Guilty. Maybe you've done it at a family function, or maybe at work with a coworker. Perhaps a family member or a coworker that every time you're around them, you just feel like you're walking on eggshells. And your greatest hope in that timing is that nothing's going to happen and nobody's going to say anything that's going to set them off in any way. Any of you ever found yourself in that situation? Don't point at them. Gosh. I mean, you probably maybe experienced family outings that are like this too. Have you ever come home from wherever you've been, whatever you've been doing, okay? And you were content to just sit back, take a deep breath, and go, well, that wasn't too bad. Everybody seemed to get along. And so, they held it together too through the whole time. Basically, you're grateful that you survived it without getting any additional battle scars. You were content as a peacekeeper, but that's not how it should be. We should be concerned if our primary purpose is to avoid the confrontation. Because Jesus says there's something better than being a peacekeeper. It's being a peacemaker. And a peacemaker is someone who will embrace the confrontation in order to make the peace. Peacemakers actually recognize that there is a healthy way to do confrontation, and that will be a way to create true peace in the relationship. Peacemakers go before offering their gift to God, and they initiate, they apologize, and they do whatever it takes, even to work through the difficult things. They want to make peace where they know there currently is no peace. Now, we all know that things get in the way. Things always get in the way. And honestly, the thing that gets in the way most, the greatest enemy of peace is pride. Pride is the greatest enemy of peace. I mean, look at any relationship that you know of, whether it's one you have or whether it's one that you know two other people have, okay? You look at that and you realize that that relationship has a lot of tension. Chances are those are two pretty prideful people. These are the kind of people that they will say things like, I'm not going to apologize. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to say I'm sorry. They should apologize first. They should be the first one to apologize. And what happens is the pride gets in the way, and it makes it first about us instead about what God's desired outcome is. When pride controls the relationship, we end up failing to own up to our part that is involved in the hurt. We go to justify our own feelings. Been guilty of that. We justify our feelings. We'll go, it's only 5% me and it's 95% them. So they need to apologize first. Here's the problem with that sentiment. We're still part of the problem. 5%, still a part of it. I think of my kids in this. Okay, how many of you have experienced this one? Okay, it's a mess made. Argument ensues. Whose fault is it that made the mess? Then it ensues to, well, I'm not going to clean that. I didn't make that mess. That wasn't me. Who acted first? Well, she hit me. Well, he hit me first. So? It makes me want to pull my hair out. Feels like it's a daily process. You want to look at him and go, I clean up your mess every single day. We're instructed by God that we have to do our part to make it right, even if it's only 5% our fault. Paul gave us this in Romans 12. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. I want to highlight a specific word in there. You. If possible, so far as it depends on who? You. Me. Live peaceably with all. We can't control the other person's reaction to our attempts at peacemaking. But so far as it depends on us, we just make our best effort in an attempt to reconcile that relationship. We can't let pride get in the way of being obedient to what God has called us to do. Now, when we get to that place where we're reminded that people matter to God, that they need to be of the utmost importance to us as well, and we recognize our own pride, and we've asked God to remove it and deal with it, and we move from the biggest enemy of peace, and we then come into contact with the greatest friend of peace. The best friend of peace is humility. Obviously, we're going to do a complete 180 from the greatest enemy. The enemy's pride, the best friend is humility. And that's because it allows us to recognize and say that I'm going to own up my part in this. I'm going to be faithful before God, and I'm going to recognize that this relationship is more important than my ego. I choose to love this person more than I choose to love being right. Maybe you could think of a situation in your own life right now that pride has kept you from doing what is right. What do you think God could do in your heart if you let Him replace that pride with humility? You recognize your own part in that situation, how you play into it. God might not just keep you in a place of where you're a peacekeeper, but He might move you into a position of being a peacemaker. But there's got to be a way to accomplish this. And there has to be a conversation. What exactly does that conversation look like when we choose to sit down with that person and try to talk out what they have against us? What do we talk about? How do we navigate those hurt feelings toward one another? How do we take the steps to rebuild and reconcile that relationship? Side note, it's not always going to lead to that. But at least we're doing what God said and we're trying. It's all going to start by simply recognizing that there's a right way and there is a wrong way when you go to give an apology. And the problem is that we don't know these things. The problem is that a lot of times we have a hard time applying these things in the situation. And I don't want you to just agree in theory over these steps. They're all good ideas. They're all good thought processes, but I don't want you to just agree in theory on these. Take time as we go through these and discern for yourself the ones that you think are actually valuable for you to use. So if we're going to apologize with humility, we're going to start by admitting to the specific actions and attitudes that have caused that hurt. We have to admit to the specifics. This can't be a generalization. In Psalm 32, it says, I acknowledged my sin to you. I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. You got to get specific. We're not going to just hold this idea of, well, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Well, what did you do? Healing happens when you say, here's what I did, when you name what it is. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry that you caught me giving in to those lustful desires. I'm embarrassed and I'm humiliated by this, and I'm sorry. You get specific. And actually, sometimes those specifics aren't about apologizing for what you did, but maybe it's about apologizing for what you didn't do. I'm sorry that I put work before our relationship. I'm sorry that I didn't emotionally engage with you in that situation. I'm sorry that I took you for granted this week. When you name a specific attitude or action, you begin to uncover the depth and the level to which you want them to understand that you are sorry. When they know the specific and you're willing to acknowledge that, they see a humility begin to appear. And while naming it, you need to make sure that, number two, you don't make excuses. We can't make excuses. And this started clear back in the beginning. This has been something that from the beginning of creation has been an issue. In Genesis 3, Jesus enters into the garden after the fruit's been eaten. He said, have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? And the man said, well, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree and I ate. And then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you've done? And the woman said, oh, this serpent deceived me and I ate. Didn't really own up to it right away. They're making excuses. We have to learn to take full responsibility for the actions regardless of what the other person did. We have a tendency to want to explain why we did it. And in that process, what ends up happening is sometimes, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, most of the time, our finger ends up getting pointed back at the other person instead of just simply owning up to what we've done. What I encourage you this morning is, when it comes to this aspect, don't be a butt. And what I mean by that is, I did this, and I'm sorry, but you did blank. Or maybe I reacted this way and I shouldn't have, but if you hadn't blank. Admit the specifics. Don't make excuses or explanations for your actions. Just take responsibility for it. And then you will be able to, number three, accept the consequences. We're going to reap what we sow. It's going to happen. There are consequences to every action. In Galatians 6, it says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. That is the truth of God's word. It's going to happen. When you hurt somebody, when you betray them, when you let them down, there's going to be consequences. Our choices have consequences, and we have to learn to accept them. For instance, if you've gossiped or lied about a friend or a family member or a coworker, chances are the consequence might be that they're going to become slower to trust you in the future. You have to recognize and accept that it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. Or maybe there's an instance of someone stepping out on their marriage. Do that. Consequence might be that your spouse might forgive you, But they are going to want to know where you are at all times, at every minute of the day, everywhere you go. They're going to put a tracker on your phone, and it is going to annoy the crud out of you. But you want to know something? In that situation, there's no whining. Your choice has consequences, and you have to accept them in order to rebuild that trust. Consequences are a natural part of life and are a result of our choices, and we accept that they'll be a part of rebuilding those relationships when we're seeking that forgiveness and apologizing. And in that process, we have to have room to learn how to commit to changing our behavior. You can't continue the cycle that's gotten you to this point. I yelled, sorry. I yelled, I'm sorry. I yelled, I'm sorry. Oh, I left you out, I'm sorry. I left you out, I'm sorry. I left you out, I'm sorry. And on and on and on. That's not going to work. You got to look to change your behavior so the cycle doesn't continue. In his book, Winning the War in Your Mind, Craig Rochelle wrote, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, becomes your destiny. Changing your behavior starts with winning the war in your mind. And this leads right back to what Paul said in Romans. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed, what? By the renewal of your mind. That's where it starts. You got to seek the help. You got to find the accountability. Maybe you take the time to get professional counseling. That's okay. Let me give a plug for this. It's not a dirty thing. Counseling is not a dirty word. It's not a dirty thing. It's healthy. Do what it takes to break that cycle of behavior that's keeping you in that same spot, creating the same frustrations and hurting people over and over again. Apologizing is important, but changing your behavior, renewing your mind to the right place so as not to continue is more important. And the final step in this process, I place this at the end at purpose. This very strict purpose for why this is at the end. You ask for the forgiveness. You ask for forgiveness. The reason it's last is because, honestly, it can be easy to take asking for forgiveness lightly. People can say, I did this, I'm sorry. But are they really seeking forgiveness with humility? When we go, we should truly desire that the other person know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I have thought this through. I understand the impact that this has had on you. This is what I did. I shouldn't have done it. I know that I've hurt you. I'm being intentional now. I want you to help me come up with a plan, and we're going to make sure that we avoid this happening again in the future. David's a powerhouse on this idea. Psalm 51 says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. It doesn't get much straightforward than that. Honest, vulnerable, humble. I've screwed up. I need the forgiveness. There is no excuse for my actions. And I make sure that I start new and I avoid doing this again in the future. If we've wronged somebody and we first come to them and confess, if we don't make excuses trying to explain what we did, and when we take responsibility for the consequences of our behavior and commit to changing how we interact in the future, that's when I truly believe the other person, if they're worth their salt in any way, is actually in the best place then to offer that forgiveness to us. Because they're not just hearing, I'm sorry, but what they're hearing is that you've truly taken this to heart. Something has sunk in deep. You're placing a priority now on your relationship with them and asking that forgiveness, and that is a very, very powerful thing. Now, the truth is, you can do all of these steps, and there's no guarantee that the person's response is going to be what you want it to be. They may choose to forgive you. They may choose not to forgive you. But the most important part of the whole process is that you're being obedient to what God is calling you to do once you were aware that you had wronged that person. We don't live in a fairy tale world, and reality is that some people do choose to hold their grudges and hold their hate toward other people without letting it go. And they would rather use that energy trying to get even with others rather than seeking the reconciliation that they could have with these people. The truth is, you can't control somebody else's reaction when you go to seek their forgiveness. And God knows this. It's why he told us through Paul, verse we heard earlier, if possible, so far as it depends on you, me, so far as it depends on us, the people and the children of God, live peaceably with all. You choose to be responsible for you no matter what. Sounds like a lesson that I'm always trying to teach my children. You be obedient, you do what God calls you to do, and then you just got to trust and let him take care of the rest. I want to leave you with a very simple formula for this process, because that's a lot of information. So I want to break it down for you in a very simple process. Here's how you do this. In humility, before God first, before people second. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, that sounds backwards, because didn't the scripture say I should go to the person first? Yes. When I say before God first, I mean in humility, you go before God and say, I need help to go and seek the forgiveness and give forgiveness. Then you go before the people, and you seek that forgiveness, and you give that forgiveness. Then you can come back and offer the gift. Like David gave us that example in Psalm 51. You got to be wise in your acknowledgement. You take your attitude to God, you ask for forgiveness and a changed heart, you seek his forgiveness and wisdom for how to approach that person. Because we want to be the people that God has called us to be. And we should be a people that has a desire for healthy relationships. And when something gets in the way of that, we need to be willing to humble ourselves. Not let our pride get in the way, and do the work that's necessary to embrace the confrontation. We should be peacemakers, not peacekeepers. Means we got to put in the effort. And then, once that's been done, you come to worship on Sunday or any day or any time you need to go before the cross and before God. And you can stand before him then with your ultimate offering, which is yourself. And at that time, then you can present yourself to him, knowing that you don't have any unfinished business. Peacemakers, not peacekeepers. Let's pray. Father, you are the ultimate peacemaker. You tell us in your word that your peace surpasses anything we could even begin to understand. Lord, I pray that we would seek to tap into that by confronting the things that we know are prideful holdouts in our life. Father, I pray over every individual in here right now that if there is any relationship that is in a struggle point, anything where there is conflict or struggle, Lord, I pray that you would bring those people together in a healthy way. And Lord, that you would reveal what needs to be said, what needs to be forgiven. Father, that you would reconcile relationships for your glory and for your purpose. Lord, help us to walk into our relationships with humility and not pride. Being the people that you've called us to be, peacemakers. Father, thank you for being our peacemaker.